Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carrie Harrisheim with the Consumer Technology Association. Welcome to the Smart Energy Roundtable as a part of CTA's Technology and Standards Spring Forum. We're very glad that you joined us today. This past fall, CTA's Technology Council launched an advisory group to explore the application of smart energy, which helped formulate today's discussion. Today, I'm very excited to be joined by industry experts to explore the business of smart energy and what the future holds for smart home devices, distributed energy resources, and energy cloud aggregators. Specifically, our speakers will review existing and future communication and interoperability standards and discuss potential gaps facing the industry. We will start with sharing the speakers' remarks, which we recorded earlier today. All of the speakers are live with us today, and they will be answering your questions after the panel discussion. To submit a question to our speakers, click on the icon with the speech bubble in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit questions at any time. And with that, let's get started. First up, we have Rehan Hassan of CTA to provide an overview of the smart energy landscape and preview a soon-to-be-released white paper addressing the state of the industry developed by CTA Smart Energy Advisory Group. Welcome, Rehan.
Thank you, Carrie. Hello, everyone. I'm Rehan Hassan, Senior Director in CTA's Tech and Standards Department. CTA has been involved in the smart energy management area for quite some time now. We are an ANSI-accredited standards development organization and have published device standards and produced many market and consumer studies through our research department. White paper Carrie mentioned was requested by our advisory group to better understand the landscape of smart home energy management systems. Let's get into it. Smart home energy management systems, you start off at the base level considering what's offered by energy management systems in general. The general goal here is whether you're an energy provider or consumer is energy savings and efficiency. Some systems offer complete home automation with motion sensitive lighting or electric outlets that turn off when they're not being used. And of course, with automation comes consumer convenience and flexibility as well that's offered by the system. We'll also take a look at the market from a consumer perspective, identify areas of potential growth and implementations that can be improved on, and finally, standards. How can we really bring this all together? There are multiple industry stakeholders in this space, ranging from device makers to utilities. And this has led to multiple industries working on many individual standards through different SDOs, many of which are aimed at improving systems, communications, and interoperability. We'll review a couple of those standards and maybe through our discussion identify some potential gaps and potential areas for harmonization. In terms of energy savings, first we'll look at the big picture of the energy savings potential. Over the years, CTA has conducted numerous studies characterizing savings potential. A 2016 CTA study, one of the first of its kind, looked at energy savings potential of home automation, smart home, IoT products, and systems. It showed how our increased use of several types of connected devices and systems can decrease overall home energy use and put things into an energy management systems perspective. Just for the U.S. alone, these savings could potentially account for up to 5% of total residential primary energy consumption. And many of these savings come from home automation. As an example, the study's findings highlight several areas where home automation could potentially deliver energy savings, including connected thermostats, HVAC zoning, control of window shades, smart plugs, and smart lighting as well. The savings potential itself can be further implemented by government and industry partnerships. Smart cities are typically a collaboration between local residents, governments, and businesses. It can also happen at the federal level. The U.S. Department of Energy started a campaign called Smart Energy Analytics, which encourages businesses to use smart energy management systems. The goal is to improve monitoring techniques and energy saving practices that improve the building's energy efficiency. In addition to that, they offer funding efforts to realize some of the energy saving potentials with some small scale tests and implementations. And also in the voluntary space, last year, Energy Star launched its specification for smart home energy management systems. taking an occupancy-based approach and identifying baseline qualifications for a number of devices that could be included within the package. And as we're looking at this, we explored a couple use cases as well. Now, there may be within this a number of use cases. These are just sort of the high-level ones. And the energy savings can be realized and applied at different levels of scalability. Starting off in your home, you should be able to, in the home, you should be able to communicate with a building or a home within a community or homes within an entire city itself. In each use case, the home may or may not have an energy management system or a hub, so devices may communicate at a local level. Multiple devices may or may not be from the same manufacturer, so you may have an interoperability issue, or the smart home may or may not interact directly with the utility or a potential energy aggregator. And motivations in each one of these use cases are also very different, motivated by financial incentives, energy savings, and a competitive real estate landscape. Smart buildings themselves are incorporating a wide range of technologies such as solar panels, tankless water heaters, sensors controlled by smart lighting, AI-powered building management systems, and some predictive energy systems and preventive maintenance systems. The one we'll take a closer look at, and the one that's most relevant to consumers, may be energy management systems within a home. Smart homes contain smart technology, including appliances, lighting, wall outlets, window coverings, HVAC units, thermostat, all of which have advanced features to improve their operations. Smart systems use sensors to monitor variables like temperature and occupancy and adjust settings accordingly. All of these devices have some sort of smart control capability in and of themselves, even without being connected to each other or the outside world. For example, a lighting system can turn on and off or brighten and dim in response to changes in ambient light. And this would generally be a single family dwelling with a variety of applications and requirements depending on their devices, the smart energy hub or demand response capabilities. So we also explored what type of devices then are within consumers' home. CTA's Smart Home Ecosystem Study found that nearly 83 million US households own some type of smart home technology. And about 29 million of those households owned energy management devices such as smart thermostats, smart plug, smart switch, lighting, window treatments, and lighting control systems. The energy management category itself, however, is lagging behind some of the other smart products within a home, such as audio-video products, home networking, and home security products. And some of the most common products related to smart energy were smart thermostats and smart plugs. It's also not known if a consumer has one of these devices or multiple devices that they want to work in tandem within their home. So that becomes a challenge in the future when they try to add more devices going forward. And in terms of what the consumer wants, overall ease of use continues to be the main purchase driver of smart home devices. 28% of consumer smart home device purchases is or will be just convenience. Consumers also want smart home devices to primarily provide them with security, ease of use as number one, security, as well as energy efficiency. The more devices current smart home device owners have, the more they want to be able to update or upgrade their particular equipment. And convenience sort of plays into interoperability as well. More than 2/3 of consumers prefer smart home devices that work with other devices within their home. They all have a different method of interaction with smart home devices. Some use voice control, others use an app, others prefer to use a central hub within their home. And methods of installation also vary. depending on if a consumer is purchasing one device and then building a package themselves, or if they were to go to a third-party supplier and purchasing a whole home sort of package, including security and energy management and audio video products that would all then be professionally installed within the consumer's home. So in terms of the market space, what can we do to look forward in growth and implementation? And really going off the purchase motivator, CTA's research shows that in each of the categories below for energy management, smart thermostats, plugs, and smart switches are most likely the growth category products. In lighting, smart lighting will continue to grow, as well as lighting control system. And in other products, smart appliances are expected to continue to grow and be purchased by consumers going forward. Across segments, consumers want smart home technology just in general to be ease of use and make their daily lives just a little more convenient. Government, industries, partnerships, they also play a large role and are a large part of that growth and implementation of the smart energy technology. EPA just last year launched their first smart home energy management system specification. It established required energy savings features, which include reliable occupancy-based control of connected devices, user feedback and display of energy use data, limitations on standby power of required devices, and inclusion of an Energy Star certified thermostat. And those are some of the minimum requirements that they have in this initial specifications. Along with this, they'll be collecting field data to then assess how this specification is done in the field and how much energy savings they really did achieve off of this. So EPA did not have any occupancy-based data on efficiency. So therefore, the specification itself would require a periodic submission of statistical analysis gathered from installed certified packages. And then the data would be used to then establish compliance in future specifications going forward. There are also potential add-ons in the future for water heater controllers, pool pump controllers, connected Energy Star room AC, automated shades, or EV chargers with demand response capabilities. So it's a program in its initial stage, but it is a space that regulators are getting into. Even though this is a voluntary program, it is from EPA and could be seen as picked up as regulation by other government entities down the road. So it is something at the top of the list, and it's something they want to explore a little further. And to sort of cement or help some of the impending regulations that already exist, we need to look at industry standards. And the industry standards in this area vary quite a lot, just because of the makeup of the participants. You have participants from device makers, distributed energy resources, energy aggregators, utilities, and standards really exist within each of those levels and are created by each one of those different industries. And then they're all trying to solve sort of the communication problem. And communication or interoperability could occur in a number of different ways, depending on if you're a device manufacturer or if you're a utility or energy aggregator. It could happen for devices at a local level, at a cloud level, and then communication requirements are different for smart grid as well as demand response. Each one of these standards do have a little bit of flexibility, but there really isn't that one baseline requirement that would really streamline communications through all of these different levels. And to take a little bit closer look at some standards that exist already, we'll start off with CTA. CTA has two standards, CTA 709-9, which is open data communications and building automation for recording of energy measurements. The other is CTA 2045-A, Modular Communications Interface for Energy Management. And then this is broken down into 3 additional dot standard for firmware transfer, generic display, and thermostat message set. The CTA 2045 standard itself serves as is an MCI port that serves as an open communications interface and is built in or retrofitted on appliances such as water heaters. It allows manufacturers to develop products that have grid connectivities and are demand response ready. Utilities can then deploy these products and programs without needing a separate interface for each type of appliance, and they can administer their demand response programs through any device that's equipped with CTA 2045. And as an example, water heaters is one area where we've seen them. EV chargers is a place where they're becoming more prevalent as well. It's something that state regulators are looking at also, because utilities want to be able to implement this within their demand response programs. The state of Washington recently referenced CTA 2045-A as a standard that could be used to meet those demand response capabilities. Next, standards organization that's in this area, again at the device level, is the Open Connectivity Foundation. These specifications themselves offer a universal cloud-based smart home solution, delivers a connectivity framework and sort of their own coined IoTivity open source implementation, and offers a certification program as well. The devices can securely communicate regardless of their form factor, operating system, service provider, transport technology, or ecosystem. And now OCF does this with a number of specifications. They have a core specification, specs for devices that would then be certified as OCF devices, bridging specifications that'll help bridge communications between OCF devices that are within the ecosystem and non-OCF devices. And then they offer a certification plan itself. And again, once you're within that ecosystem, the idea is to have easy interoperability within products of different manufacturers and different types. And then if you're not, be able to use the bridging specification to be able to communicate with products that are outside the non-OCF system. Next, we'll go a little bit higher on the utility side at IEEE standards, and one in specific is IEEE 2030.5. One of my fellow panelists will go into this a little more detail. Just to give you an overview, IEEE 20.5 serves as kind of a general purpose communication standard for smart devices as well as the smart grid. It leverages open communications protocols intended to suit the majority of connected products, again, regardless of manufacturer. So again, trying to be as interoperable and as open as possible, and be able to accept a multitude of devices. And then there are some other standards development efforts as well, OpenADR, Zigbee Alliance, SunSpec Alliance, and at the international level within ISO IEC JTC-1. My fellow panelists will go into these Zigbee Alliance and the SunSpec Alliance specifications in a little more detail. Finally, when you have these standards, again, they come with certain barriers. Interoperability, we'd mentioned, was one of them. But if we take a step back and kind of look at where we are right now, what is holding us back from really having consumers get a hold of these smart devices, smart capable devices. On the consumer side, cost seems to be the number one reason. Again, this is based off of CTA's consumer research of smart devices. Lack of familiarity is another one. Some will just buy one device, and then maybe due to some interoperability issue, they may not buy another, or that one device is enough to satisfy them. Or they're not familiar enough with the process if they want to add on more devices within their home or to their system. And again, last one I've mentioned a couple times, ease of use kind of goes hand in hand with interoperability. And really, as consumers become more familiar with smart home technologies and satisfied with the comfort, the convenience, the energy benefits that they can bring, they're more likely to then purchase additional devices and spread the word to friends and families as they're going forward. And in terms of industry, there are many industry standard efforts underway to address each specific industry's need, and it sort of creates a silo type effect. When each industry is kind of looking at what their needs are and what they need to do going forward, going from device makers to utilities and kind of everyone in between. Standards at the in-home or device level, again, offer a variety of different implementations. OCF is offering a sort of a cloud-based implementation. Zigbee is looking to offer sort of a local level device implementation. And then finally, there are just some proprietary or customized solutions a device maker or manufacturer may have that then affects the scalability and the implementation of that particular product category or smart energy devices in the system. So given those barriers, if those could be addressed maybe in some sort of a minimal way, if there could be a baseline standard or baseline communication profile that could be used throughout the entire ecosystem, or some sort of minimum requirements going forward, that may help us a lot in terms of making sure consumers have that ease of use, understand the energy savings that come with smart technologies and smart home devices, and are able to enjoy what our device makers have to offer. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Rehan. Now, with that background, we're going to be able to hear some more details from our other industry experts that we have on hand. So first, I'd like to welcome Chris DiCenzo. Chris, please introduce yourself and share about your role in this space.
All right, great. Hello, everybody. I'm Chris DiCenzo. I'm a principal engineer at Amazon. I'm focused on smart home and Alexa devices. I also happen to be the chair of the Connected Home over IP Steering Committee. Connected Home over IP is also known as CHIP in the Zigbee Alliance. So today, I'm going to start by talking about a history of Alexa Smart Home and why IoT is so important to us. I'll talk about the new Connected Home over IP initiative, which is happening in the Zigbee Alliance. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about the direction that we see smart home going in the future. So at Amazon, we're really impressed by the sheer range of devices that are available from different device makers on Amazon in the smart home space. The most popular Alexa features today are, besides music and Q&A, it's smart home. There's over 100,000 different smart home products that can be controlled with Alexa from more than 9,500 unique brands. So customers are using Alexa to control their smart home devices hundreds of millions of times every week. We've got tens of millions of smart home devices that are connected to Alexa, and customers can choose from more than 11,000 Works with Alexa certified devices. The most popular devices that we're seeing connected to Alexa are lights and smart plugs, switches, speakers, and thermostats. So At Alexa, we're super excited about the voice interaction model. We believe that Alexa and voice control in general is the future for how people will interact and control the devices in their homes. We think that voice can really enable a delightful user experience. We feel that a smart home will ultimately understand what you mean based on context. So where you are, how your system is set up, and what routine you have. So it can do things without you even asking. And we hope to facilitate sales of these sorts of delightful devices through Amazon for the many different companies that list products there. So let's flash back a little bit to smart home in 2015, which is the time when Alexa first came out. So if you remember, back then and for a long time up until then, if you wanted to turn on a light, you had to unlock your phone, open up an app, find the light you were looking to control, and then press a button on it, right? And at that point, you might as well just have gotten up off the couch and turned off the light yourself. Smart home really was something that was for early adopters. So you can see here in this diagram, we've got 3 different Wi-Fi devices. One of them is an Echo Dot, and each one of them is connected to its own cloud. And you can also see there's a Zigbee hub off on the right that has 3 different Zigbee devices connected to it that also connects to the cloud. And so what we did with Alexa was we introduced the concept of a smart home skill. So using these skills, we can have a single user interface that can interact with all of the different devices in your home. So Alexa can allow the different smart home systems to customize the experience for the user and expose unique features, all through voice or through a common app. Essentially, what we're doing is bridging the best smart home systems together using the cloud. So the cloud ensures reliable communication. So regardless of your home network topology, we can allow the user to control it, and secure communication, because in the cloud, we can utilize the latest security algorithms and best practices. So what happened? Well, we saw, as a result, even more devices and more protocols being connected and being offered to customers. People were able to control new categories of devices like ovens, and new protocols emerged like BLE mesh that were targeted to very specific use cases or business models. So the cloud connections allowed us to remove the protocol from interfering with the user experience. And it enabled new innovative experiences and the emergence of specialized domains like lighting and HVAC, smart energy, kitchens. All of these could interact with each other through Alexa. So next, we set our sights on how to bring these types of new features and new devices to even more customers. So how can we drive adoption? Well, at Amazon, we always start with the customer. So we wanted to lower the cost of entry. We wanted to incorporate a hub into Echo to make it easy for customers to try smart home for the first time without needing to necessarily invest in a much larger system. We also wanted to simplify setup to reduce the biggest source of frustration for consumers. We wanted to make sure you could set up devices by voice. We wanted to make things plug and play, literally, where you get a device shipped to your house, you plug it in, and it just works. We also wanted to give customers peace of mind. So we set a very high bar for security and reliability and made sure that devices that worked with Alexa and that were certified worked with Alexa met that bar. Now, when deciding to put this hub functionality into the hub, into the Echo in order to reduce this barrier of entry, we needed to choose a protocol. And there really were a lot of choices, both at the radio lowest layer, all the way up to the protocol stacks that that your radio might implement, application layer, and even among among devices that speak the same protocol, there were different works with programs, right? Every major smart home system provider had their own works with programs, sometimes with conflicting requirements. So ultimately, we chose Zigbee. And we did that because it was an open standard. We think that proprietary standards aren't really customer friendly because they lead to extra costs for device makers. They slow down time to market, and it's a lot of overhead for us to maintain as well as for everyone else. In terms of adoption, Zigbee passed over 500 million devices sold in 2018 with projections to hit 3.6 billion in 2023. It's also mature. There's a diverse ecosystem of silicon vendors, device makers, software integrators, and hub providers already making Zigbee. It's also, they figured out a way to make Zigbee devices low cost while still ensuring battery life, security, keeping hardware costs low, and even doing novel things like green power to get really low cost devices that use a very small amount of energy. And we saw the exciting initiatives going on in the Zigbee Alliance. So smart energy was one, green power, some stuff around sub-gigahertz and dot. These all made Zigbee a good choice. So we did, though, find with this new cloud-connected model of controlling devices, with the Echo device being for early adopters, we found that some partner clouds were more reliable than others. We also found that when you communicate cloud to cloud for smart home interactions, there's often a 1 to 2 second latency incurred, which isn't ideal for many of the different interactions that people have with their smart devices. Another problem is just inconsistent latency, which adds another dimension to it. Some clouds are going to be slower than others, and that can lead to a non-ideal user experience. So connected home over IP. There really is no widely adopted smart home application layer for IP devices today. And our goal with chip or connected home over IP was to try to fill that gap. And so we got together with a number of the other smart home system providers in the industry within the Zigbee Alliance and said, we want to do something about this. Now, there are endless approaches that you could take to address the gap. Some of them super elegant, some of them, ugly hacks, but ultimately everything is going to be equivalent in terms of functionality. But what makes one standard successful while another academic is adoption. So the most important thing to us was to make sure that the resulting standard that we develop can be adopted, or else it's not a good use of any of our times. So we're bringing together in CHIP the leading consumer device companies and the smart home system providers. We're committing significant resources, and we're insisting on not starting from scratch in order to avoid those academic debates. We're really trying to leverage the existing building blocks for things like data models, authentication, discovery mechanisms, so that our time to market can be reduced and the result can require less time to stabilize because we're building off of things that we already have. To promote adoption and improve interoperability, we're committing to open standards that are open source. So in order to call this chip specification final, every aspect of the specification needs to be backed by an open source implementation, as well as certification tests. So IP is powerful, right? It has a rich ecosystem of algorithms, transports, infrastructure for communicating within and across different networks. IP has been ported to different physical and link layers like Wi-Fi, Ethernet, Thread, BLE, cellular, and others. Chip, though, is an application layer that rides on top of IP. So it should be able to work on all these different physical layer technologies. Participants in the effort are going to be focused on a lot of the different physical layers. Some might plan to use Thread, others might use Wi-Fi, while still others may use a combination of those or something else. So we've committed to the market that a spec will be available in 2020. And it's important that, that our effort not sacrifice this timeliness. So most of the folks involved have been in smart home for a long time. We should be able to leverage our collective wisdom and toolboxes to piece together a robust and secure standard that meets our requirements. Data model convergence is a pillar of the Zigbee Alliance, and it's our intention for the effort to further that objective. So CHIP is going to start with the Zigbee cluster library, or the ZCL. We'll add in necessary functionality from open source technologies like Weave, HomeKit, and Alexa Smart Home, and then contribute the result back to the Data Model Working Group. So the Data Model Working Group is a new working group in the Zigbee Alliance, which is intended to be a common data model that the entire industry can leverage. And so it's not just for the Zigbee, and it's not just for CHIP, but we hope that others can leverage it and contribute to it as well. So where does this leave us? So we enter the chip era with most bridging today being done through the cloud. It gets us security, it gets us generally reliable connectivity, it gets us a very rich device experience and a very much simpler out-of-the-box experience. However, when we bring chip into the mix, we now can complement the cloud connectivity with a local path. So we can reduce latency, we can make the latency more consistent. And now we can be fully functional in our smart home even when the internet is down or those cloud connections fail. So with significant adoption by the major smart home systems, we expect this one standard will bring down device costs. It'll increase selection for consumers and drive more adoption. Long term, the purchase experience is going to be simplified. There will be less compatibility confusion for consumers. When they buy a product, they'll know it's just going to work in the system they have already. Finally, the growth and innovation that we've seen over the past few years is going to continue. The barrier to entry for innovative new devices and new device experiences will be even lower because you'll be able to have them in most of the different smart home systems. So tomorrow, smart home, we expect, is going to be just plug and play for consumers. They can buy the product that they like, that appeals to them from Amazon.com or from their local retailer, and know that it's just going to work. Interactions with smart home will be intuitive. Some will be by voice, some will be from the touchscreen. Some may be from your phone even. And we think that device makers will be able to innovate with that much lower barrier of entry because they don't have to they don't have to build a device and design a device to work in 20 different technologies and protocol stacks. Ultimately, we want smart home purchases to be seen as an investment in your home, something that guests and future occupants can enjoy as well. That's all I've got. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Chris, for all that great information. So next, we're going to be joined by Tom Tanzi. Welcome, Tom. Please introduce yourself and your role in this space.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. My name is Tom Tanzi. I'm with the Sunspec Alliance, and we are a global nonprofit trade alliance, and we're focusing on standards development, specifically for distributed energy resources. We've been in operation for about a decade now and have worked on a great number of different standards pertaining to distributed energy. Distributed energy is defined as those types of generation sources that attach to the local grid, so the one that's in your neighborhood for your homes or for your businesses. And so those types of resources would include solar panels, of course, energy storage, and now increasingly electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging infrastructure all comes under the jurisdiction. We talked about regulation earlier, same jurisdiction, regulation, and standards, all associated with those types of energy generation sources. Now, so my talk today is adapted from one that I presented at a security conference about securing distributed energy resources in California. And so you may ask, why would we start here? And the answer is, well, California, at least in this field, has been a key center for innovation in distributed energy. Most of the research that was done on smart inverters, and these are the devices that convert energy collected by solar panels from DC power to AC power. So the smart inverters were developed here in California. As a result of that innovation, added into the equation for a smart inverter was data communication. Up until that time, inverters operated completely autonomously according to pre-programmed set of settings that would be associated with the energy conditions in the area it was installed in. And even today, smart inverters work largely in an autonomous fashion, but they're also connected up to networks, IP-based networks, as was mentioned before, for the ability to do various operations like apply settings for different types of the season when grid operation would be different, perhaps to curtail the generation of solar energy at a particular time of day because the grid is taking too much. Perhaps in the future, even to sell excess energy that we may have available into the market to take advantage of price arbitrage and things of that nature. And so California, as I said, is the center of innovation for that, and we're leading the nation and leading national standards, in fact, in this area. And so that is the reason for the focus of California in this talk. Now, about the SunSpec Alliance, I mentioned we've been at our work for about a decade. We have about 110 organizations now that work with us, varying sizes and shapes from all around the world, dominated by the large industrial companies that develop distributed generation resources. We are publishers of some of our own original standards. So SunSpec Modbus is an original standard. SunSpec Rapid Shutdown, which is a standard that goes into the solar panel itself, is something that we originally created. And then finally, Orange Button is another major piece of work that we developed with the Department of Energy for application-to-application data interchange, specifically for distributed energy. And in addition to creating original standards, we contribute to international standards. And so earlier in the presentation, IEEE 2030.5 was mentioned, and the Zigbee Alliance is mentioned. And that piqued my interest because we started working with the Zigbee Alliance back in 2012, back when that technology was a single monolithic stack. And at that point, it was about to break loose and what was called Smart Energy Profile. And these are the things that control the thermostats and the hot water heaters and distributed energy resources and the EVs and so forth. Well, at that time, there was a move to separate that from the core physical layer stack and to make the whole thing operate in a TCP/IP-based framework. And so we worked in that initiative to help pry apart the two parts of that solution. And in that process, SunSpec contributed the distributed energy resource models. I really stumbled with that one. And so specifically models for inverters and for meters were two components that we contributed to the IEEE 2030.5 standard. And so in fact, today we maintain an interest in and have written conformance test suites and offer a certification program on that standard. In addition, it works with all the other core standards that we support today. So our philosophy is, yes, we fill in gaps as need be, but really the idea is to drive to an international standard because that's the way you get the broadest adoption. We've also played a key role in the development of the IEEE 1547 standard. And you get thrown a lot of the alphabet soup at you on talks like this, but the IEEE 1547 standard is a core one for distributed energy. And so this was written back into the U.S. Energy Act back in about 2006. And what it stipulates is that all distributed energy resources, solar panels, electric vehicles, batteries that get connected to the nation's electrical grid must comply to that core standard. And so everything that we have, all the generators connected today, comply to that standard. Well, in 2018, on the heels of wrapping up work for California Rule 21, the IEEE 1547 work group convened and ultimately ratified a standard called IEEE 1547-2018. And in that, all sorts of things were changed to make the standard more flexible and resilient. But the major change that occurred there is data communication was added as a core requirement. And so what that now, the standard now says is that any device that comes onto the distribution grid must support at least one standard interface. And your choices would be Sunspec Modbus, which is a local field area protocol, IEEE 2030.5, which you heard mentioned. That I would characterize that as a system to utility protocol. And then finally, IEEE 1815. This is an industrial protocol known as DNP3, also for system to utility interoperations, mostly used by US utility operators. And so those are the core standards that we work with and have a hand and a purpose in driving. And we have board representation from some of the world's leading companies. And so we're serious about this, and it's, I believe it's showing. So now, distributed energy resources and the energy sector in general, I would say, is one of the last sectors that is being taken over, if you will, or subsumed within internetworking technology. And so it's a late adopter, but that also means that we don't have a lot of connectivity taking place right now in distributed energy resources. But the road started back in Germany in about the 2010 timeframe, and from there pretty much took a beeline for California in terms of what the innovation that was taking place. Now, lots of things happened in the interim. California put together a smart inverter working group at the same time that Zigbee Alliance specification was broken loose. And at that point, a bunch of core requirements were laid in place. A lot of them I think people that are involved in this type of work would consider are fundamental, but we accomplished all that. And finally, in 2016, having had the requirements set, the group then, within the California context, chose the IEEE 2030.5 protocol to fulfill its mission. And so, as I mentioned, it is compatible with Zigbee. It's based on TCP/IP, and by compatible with Zigbee means it's at least cognizant of operating in low power environments on small devices. It's certainly very much entwined with mainstream internet working, and 2030.5 includes the ability to have security via transport level 1.2 and using strong cryptography. So those were also nice attributes, and all led to the selection of the IEEE 2030.5 standard as the default standard to connect distributed energy in California. In 2017, because this is a regulated field, the state regulator told the utilities to go work with the manufacturers and to refine the feature set out of this very broad 23.5 standard and pick those core features that you need to get your work done. And so that was a really critical step because it allows real work to take place by bounding it in scope. And so that happened in 2017. At that point, some additional requirements were put in for the utility side, for the servers. Some other things happened with regard to a rollout of inverters in this period of time, unrelated to data communication. But back on the communication thread, Sunspec then delivered our test procedures and established a public key infrastructure to support that TLS 1.2 application that I mentioned. Now, ultimately, as this is a national and a global problem, the U.S. national standards were then updated. As I mentioned, California was the driver, but the national standards fall on very close on its heels. And 2019 was a gestation period. 2020, now actually coming up in June 22nd, the phase 2 requirements, which are the communication requirements, come into effect. I'll mention there that those requirements were supposed to come in March, and there was a big flurry of activity. Can got kicked down the road for sort of obvious reasons. But now, as of this summer, all distributed energy resources that never previously communicated, by the way, are now going to be coming online. So this is to say that this type of standards development takes time. In this case, we're talking about the bulk power system ultimately, and so there's lots of special considerations for networking around there. And of course, ultimately, it sort of boils down to how does this affect the consumer, which I'll get to here in just a moment. Okay, so about California and how quickly you can expect what's happening in California to spread across the country. We have a policy for solar in every new home that starts this year, and we're moving to 60% renewables from about 30% plus right now by 2030, and then 100% by 2045. So when you consider the number of people that live in this state, that represents a lot of solar power, also represents a lot of IP addresses for each home that ultimately gets connected to this network. Yeah, I mentioned about the great technology contributions, but then getting back to what the impact is on the nation, it means that at the end of 2019, California represented 41% of the total market share. And with these IEEE 1547 regulations coming on board, there's going to be another 40% of the market that will comply to the same rules that California will. So the remarks I'm making about the network in California, you can just consider those to really be doubled when you consider the national impact. There's about 1 million systems installed to date. Those are currently not networked. They may be networked at some point, but there's no mandate to bring in the installed base. However, with about 250,000 new systems coming on each year, you can expect that the network is very big, as you can see here. So at the end of 2019, the total number of systems, including all of California, was about 2.1 million overall. And I believe that the updated numbers indicate that there's around 2.4 million of these systems. And with the effectively a linear growth rate that we see with the number of DER systems coming online, it doesn't take too long, maybe 18 months to double the size of this network. Now, we were asked to point out some of the challenges or gaps that we see within these different type of consumer-related solutions and protocols. And the fundamental issue of interoperability, no question, that is the dominant issue on the scene, is that how easy are these technologies to absorb and to install and then to integrate with these systems so that you can take advantage of them. DER maybe in some cases would have even a little bit less of consumer interaction in terms of apps and so forth, although you get all that stuff. But the main point is when you commission the thing, you want it to just work. And so that remains a key challenge. I would say longer term, the bigger challenge is system security and cybersecurity, if you want to call it that. So why do I say that that's so important? Well, the networking standard that we've chosen has a very good profile for securing data over the wire, but it's effectively, the standards are effectively silent about what happens with data at rest. So for a device, how do you ensure that that device doesn't open up security gaps? And these devices are all connected back to a bulk system at the utility and aggregators. And likewise, the standards for securing those data centers, whether they be in an aggregator or a utility, are at least obscure. If they exist, then they're obscure. And certainly, data centers have great basic policies. Utilities certainly have great basic policies for offering security, but this is a little bit different animal where they're interconnecting with devices that they don't own or control. So there's sort of a mutual authentication amongst other things that needs to occur to make these systems safe. And then when it comes to consumer issues, of course, the privacy of the data. Now, on the list of my personal concerns, that truly is number 3 on the list, because I think we're just a little bit lower on Maslow's hierarchy here, and need to get sort of the basic system set up, because that represents the bigger risk than personal privacy. Although I don't want to downplay that at all. I'm just saying that in terms of the current reflection of priority, that's how I would see it at the time. And yeah, so there's the updated number as of Q3 2019. The COVID situation has definitely put a damper on the number of systems, but even with that, I would hazard to say that we have close to 2.5 million PV systems in the U.S. now. So back to the protocol issue and how does all this stuff work? Well, California Rule 21, as I mentioned, chose 2030.5 as a default. The national standard also indicates it as one of the standard compliance interfaces for 1547. And in fact, I would predict that inverter systems would probably end up with two standard interfaces, Sunspec Modbus for the local area and 2030.5 for the system to utility interconnection. Well, why do I say that? Well, in fact, within the 1547 standard, there was one field bus network standard chosen, Sunspec Modbus, and one high volume interface for system to utility, and that's 2030.5. So I'm pretty confident in that prediction about how it will roll out. And in terms of how the consumer interacts with this network and to the utility, well, within the California rules, which I think will be reflected in national rules, you can connect in, you're obligated to prove that you can connect in one of two ways. You can either connect directly to the utility system, and that's the pathway shown along the top here, or you may go through an intermediate system, through some sort of a gateway energy management system that we already talked about, or via an aggregator. And within the consumer space, this gateway EMS, in some ways, it's a functional equivalent of a direct connect. And so I suggest that there's actually a fourth pattern here as well, where within the consumer devices, you have a gateway EMS that then get aggregated and then ultimately talk to the utility. And in terms of the issues that we're dealing with at the rollout phase really has to do with the fact that this is a two-way level of authentication. So in most of society, we're used to our bank authenticating that we're the right person withdrawing the money from our bank. But in the energy sector, it's a two-way street. Yes, the utility wants to know who we are. We also want to know who that utility is. So there is a mutual handshake that takes place to send both monitoring and control data up and down the line. Now, this is really an interesting situation because an action that's taken at the utility can cause, for example, your system to stop collecting energy and to effectively curtail. That's one thing it could do. But in any case, it has the potential to operate in ways that the consumer didn't fully understand. So that's why it's so important for this mutual authentication to take place. Also, from a bulk power system standpoint, the utility wants to know that the devices were made in the proper way and haven't been tampered with and are traceable and so forth. And mutual authentication helps in that regard as well. But at the end of the day, this is a different style of application because of the fact that it ultimately does, or it can have a direct impact on the bulk power system. Okay, so that's what I would like to mention about the security aspects. Now, just a little bit more on the protocol and harmonization. As Sunspec contributed the DER models for 2030.5, we've maintained a mission to stay in lockstep with the other standards that we support. And so with the with the update of the U.S. National Energy Standard 1547, we took the liberty of improving our data models to reflect the functional requirements of that system. Those are all available now. And we also took the opportunity to separate the information models from the transport. So the models that we use for Sunspec Modbus now are available through a RESTful Web Services interface. And so this is a RESTful Web Services interface that will occupy the space down at the individual system. So where there used to be a serial port, now there's going to be some Ethernet-based derivative and an IP stack, so that the local machine can talk in using this TCP/IP stack. And so that's a JSON-based web service interface. We believe that this is the natural evolution beyond the Modbus interface, and so far uptake has been very strong on that regard. And so those protocols are compatible, as is the DNP3 protocol, the third default standard in the 1547. So why am I mentioning all this to you? Well, you have to get to that level of compatibility and interoperability before human factors really can make much of a difference. Otherwise, it costs you so much to manipulate those types of attributes. It's really just not worth it. So that type of harmonization has taken place. And even then, you need to go one further step. And our first speaker mentioned about interface certification. Definitely Sunspec is a believer in that. We have a certification program. We've combined it in the DER space with the ability to provision digital certificates from public key infrastructure in order to deliver interoperable solutions. And across home-based PV systems, energy storage systems, the cloud, and electric vehicles or cars. And so the way that it works is the manufacturers of these devices would go to a Sunspec authorized testing laboratory. There are 8 of them. And many of these labs are already doing functional electrical testing for these types of devices. And so they would take the product through its paces and test it to the relevant specification. In the case of California, IEEE 2030.5. Once that occurs and the results are passed on to Sunspec, we evaluate them and we accept or reject them. If we certify the interface, we then allow the manufacturer to join into the public key infrastructure. And to address what I mentioned, I think is probably the key challenge for our industry, which is getting the security component right. And so that allows the manufacturer of the devices that you see on the left-hand side to put these digital certificates into their devices as they roll off the production line. And then what that means is that at the point of installation, and in the case of the DER, even though this is sort of a consumer device, a professional installer is going to come out and install that for you. And when they do, when they set up your inverter or they set up your EV charger, that is going to come pre-provisioned with the digital certificate so that we can get as close to the vision that our CTA representative mentioned, which is you plug the thing in and you turn it on, or actually maybe it was the Amazon guy, sorry about that, plugged it in, you turn it on, and it just works. And so that's our objective here. And so in a nutshell, those are what I have to say about this topic for today. There's my contact information, and looking forward to the questions.
All right, thank you, Tom. Our last speaker this afternoon will be Massimo Sulky. Welcome, Maz. Please introduce yourself and your role in the space.
Thank you, Carrie. My name is Massimo Sulky. I am the co-founder of Packetized Energy, which is a startup company that focuses on basically turning connected smart devices, energy-hungry devices, into dispatchable resources for utilities and forthcoming energy markets. I'm extremely excited to be here today. Standards are something that run our lives, whether we know it or not. And certainly this roundtable here is very important for getting to the next generation of energy services and talking about the standards required for that. So thank you for the invitation. At Packetized Energy, we really believe that energy should be clean, affordable, and most importantly, easy to use and easy to interact with. And also, we believe that it should be in real time and it should be at the edge of the grid, which means you have to deal with lots and lots of devices. And that requires smarts, it requires software, it requires a platform. And for that, we are rolling out and deploying what we call the Nimble Platform, which really is becoming a marketplace or an ecosystem where flexibility sellers get a chance to interact with flexibility buyers. And the way we do that is through smart devices so that flexibility sellers can participate, which means their devices can participate. And for that participation, they receive incentives. These devices are then aggregated by our platform to turn them into valuable grid services, which we then provide to flexibility buyers, which are the wholesale markets and utilities. And in return for those grid services, we generate revenue and provide value, which is returned to the people who sell it, as well as those people who enable it, which includes program implementers, like those that deploy efficiency programs, who will then deploy essentially smart device programs, and also energy device manufacturers who are developing and necessary to basically promote the proliferation of smart energy devices. The Nimble platform provides currently 4 software modules, which allows us to really hit multiple value streams. So the key module that everyone is aware of and which has been around for about 40 years is demand response and really demand mitigation. So we call that peak crusher on the Nimble platform, which really avoids generation capacity, reduces costs, and helps utilities quite significantly. We also have Load Shaper, which provides energy arbitrage by interacting with the wholesale energy markets. And it also provides renewable energy smoothing for those who are interested in integrating more renewables. And we're also developing, with the help of DOE funding, with the help of ARPA-E, we're developing what's called Fast Tracker, which really allows us to provide faster grid services that can respond in real time, like ancillary services. And then lastly, we're really helping utilities and other market players understand how the grid responds to certain levels and certain types of flexible demand. And for that, we call it Grid Solver. And that's a device, that's a module we're very excited about coming out in the next couple of months. So this platform, Nimble, is really powerful because it connects people, it connects devices, and it connects the grid. And so for people, what we've done is we've developed a mobile app. For devices, we're integrating with manufacturers. We're going through partnerships and collaborations with them and really figuring out how we can manage a fleet of devices that we didn't build ourselves. To do that, that requires API access, and I'll talk about this in a bit. In some cases, what we've seen is there are certain gaps in existing technology. And so what we've done is we've actually leveraged the power of the Internet of Things, which really allows us to build very quickly devices. So we've gone through a UL process with our own smart water heater thermostat called the Mellow. And that's something that allows us to really work with a wide range of other devices as well, including CTA 2045 adapters and other devices that we've found useful. So we're packetized, and for Nimble, what we're interested in is really about coordinating lots of devices. And so the devices we've worked with already include electric water heaters. We're currently partnering with Nile for commercial hot water heater capabilities. We're looking at EV chargers with Webasto. We're looking at HVAC thermostats with LG, heat pumps with Mitsubishi. And we've worked in the past with grid edge batteries with Enphase and other potential partners. And we're now getting into what are called PV inverters or smart inverters. Other things we're interested in that are upcoming, refrigeration, pool pumps, water pumps, and also cooling fans. But these are more of the future rather than what's currently going on. And we use these devices not for our own needs, of course, but really with respect to helping utilities make use of the flexibility from behind-the-meter resources. And so we have a couple of projects around the US, in California, and South Carolina, and in the Northeast. And what we really allowed us to do these projects have been to pilot a number of important devices, market types and price types for consumers and for utilities. And this helps utilities really solve immediate problems they're having, but also allows them to think about future value streams. And so just to give an example of some of the services we provide and kind of emphasize these the need for real-time flexibility, what you see here is a snapshot of our module called Load Shaper, which performs essentially energy arbitrage So on the bottom, what you see are the New York ISO New England locational marginal prices, which is basically the price of energy every 5 minutes that's updated. And on the top, what you see is our fleet of water heaters for one utility in Vermont. And so what you see is that as the price goes high at the bottom, our demand is turned down. And so you can basically say this is arbitrage at its most simple. You're buying energy when the price is low. You charge up your fleet, and you sell it when the price is high, which means you don't charge your fleet. And the yellow line in the middle represents the energy baseline, which is what energy would look like if we hadn't done anything. Right? So if you had not been responding to prices, you would have gotten the yellow sign. And so what we're able to do is basically avoid periods of high cost and respond to periods of low cost. So that allows me now to talk a little bit about how we manage devices today. And so I mentioned that we have an interaction with utilities or independent system operators or wholesale markets. And that what we do today is currently with OpenADR, which has proven quite useful. We also have a couple devices where we send device commands directly, and that's for electric vehicles, heat pumps, and electric water heaters. And that allows us to basically build a fleet of connected devices. But that also requires deploying hardware into the field. Right, and so we've worked with UL to develop our own platform, which is the Mellow. We've also worked with CTA 2045 on some of the chargers and the heat pumps. What we then do is we then let people who have our devices in their homes, they have an app from which they can really control the comfort and convenience of the device, because the devices are really serving people. But it also allows the people, to engage with us. And so we can really engage with consumers very closely with this app, which provides an important portal through which grid edge flexibility happens. And we've also learned that instead of just going directly to devices, we can also go through manufacturers. So there are lots of thermostats in the field. There are lots of EVs already deployed. And a lot of those have their own connection to manufacturers' clouds. And so we have experience doing cloud-to-cloud APIs to really manage devices with or through manufacturers. And so we've done this with smart thermostats and also with batteries. And so this looks like a little bit of a complicated scenario, and I think I would agree with you, it is rather complicated because each device manufacturer have their own API. Even the CTA 2045 has certain challenges that we have to overcome between manufacturers' interpretation and the standard itself. And then we also have requirements from utilities who want to say, well, thank you for providing the service, but can you help us verify through measurement and validation that what you're providing is indeed what you're doing? And so verification is very important going forward on smart energy services. And so that creates this uncomfortable loop from the left side of the flexibility buyers all the way directly to the flexibility sellers. And that can become a challenge under existing circumstances. So let me tell you a little bit more about how we do this and some of the experiences we've gone through. So I'll focus first on the ANSI CTA 2045. Then I'll talk about OpenADR, and then I'll talk about the cloud-to-cloud experiences. So our experiences with ANSI CTA 2045 has been relatively frustrating, mainly because what we see is that between device types or manufacturers, there's not quite a consistent implementation of the CTA 2045 standard. So we found that it works really well for those devices that have temperature set points, because it seems like the device capability was really the focus in developing that those commands. What we've also noticed is that CTA 25 inherits kind of the really traditional implementation and view of demand response. And so to really do something that's faster or more advanced, like a modern grid service, smart energy services, what we've seen is that to really build those services out, you have to essentially hack your CTA 2045. So for example, if you want to shut off devices, you have to call a grid emergency because they might not all listen to the same signal otherwise. And we also find that it's quite top-down, which is not surprising because traditional DR has been around for about 40 years and tends to have been dominated by a top-down utility, for example. So what we see going forward, what will be important for CTA 2045 to really become a mainstay, is that they focus more really on device-level access. We would love to see on-off capability at the hardware level, We'd love to have power measurements available or required, and also to make it simple to manage, what is the comfort that people expect from devices. To really understand what are these comfort limits or comfort set points. And for that to happen, really the key piece would be onboard metering, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The other piece that's important is really, it might be worth thinking about not doing market services. So don't necessarily worry about whether you should shed load or low or high prices. And maybe just some device capability. And the other one we've noticed is that when you have both a DC and an AC standard, it becomes quite complicated to engage with those devices that require either one or both. And so just having a plus 5 volt requirement and a DC or an AC standard would be fantastic. The last thing too is if CTA 2045 is the only thing we need to do, there are some questions around cybersecurity and whether it's really simple to maintain device to cloud cybersecurity between aggregators and devices. And I'll bring that up towards the end of the slide. The other thing I wanted to mention is our experience with OpenADR. So that's the connection really between the market or the utility and the aggregator for managing the fleet. And so what we've seen is that it worked really well out of the box. Reporting worked really well. Some of the challenges we had really was about utilities wanting MNV and looking at individual device reports. And that really required a lot of hacking and customization, which really is not scalable. And so what we're looking for is really hierarchical standards. And the recent EPRI proposal or EPRI report that combines OpenADR with CTA 2045 is a great step, but it really inherits a lot of the 2045's market schema, which challenges some of the implementation, and instead just focusing on device capability seems much more valuable. And then lastly, the C2C cloud-to-cloud APIs between OEMs and aggregators seems to really be the way forward. We believe OEMs are best at securing their own connection to their own devices. Working with APIs is simple and would be even better with a standard developed around device capabilities, and let the aggregators then figure out what should the market be or what markets exist, because devices last, a decade or two, but markets change constantly. So it doesn't make sense to have a standard for markets. So again, the key challenge with cloud to cloud is really that a lot of devices today do not have measurement and verification capabilities because they lack onboard metering. So onboard metering, MNV is really necessary for us to be able to do creative rates and incentives. And that's really what's necessary to help make smart energy service business models work. So we really recommend that OEMs add onboard metering. Maybe Energy Star can help with that. We really believe standardizing C2C APIs will really help deployment and also to focus these standards on device capability and status rather than different grid services. So what we hope going forward is really that we have a more standardized C2C implementation. We don't need to loop around from OpenADR, and measurement verification is managed for all devices. That's certainly something we look forward to in the coming years, and we're excited about what CTA can bring to this business. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Maz. So now we're going to, I want to take the opportunity to thank each of our speakers. I do have a few questions for all of you, but I wanted to remind our audience, if you haven't already, go ahead and submit your questions for the speakers and we'll get to them shortly.
All right. So I wanted to join in now and talk a little bit more about our standards. So this is a question that I'd like to pose to each of our panelists. During the remarks that you shared here with us today, you reviewed a lot of standards and applications that are part of the smart energy ecosystem. What I want to ask is, how can any current standards that exist improve the interoperability across the ecosystem, from the home level, at the consumer device level, all the way through the utility level to gain any energy savings? Are there any current standards out there? Are there any standards that we should be looking to modify, or potentially new ones we want to create? So Chris, maybe would you like to go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, that's a really good question. And I in my view, in Amazon's view, I think this is exactly the kind of question that, that drove our participation in CHIP, because we really do believe that CHIP is the way to bridge many of these different, systems together today, right, over IP. And so you have systems today built in Zigbee or in Z-Wave that are, or other protocols that anything from measuring voltage going into a plug to, communicating with a home energy meter to find out consumption and pricing data. But the challenge is when you have so many of these different systems with different protocols, how do you build a single consumer-facing application that can take all this data together? And for us, at least, the answer is Chip, as the bridge between those. And so, Chip will model those different kinds of devices and provide, you to build an application that runs at the IP layer and is able to talk to the Zigbee system or the smart energy system in order to get that data and also get data maybe from motion sensors in the house and, and other, other appliances and things like that in order to help the consumer, reduce their consumption or save money or whatever the use case may be.
Great, thanks, Chris. Tom, anything you want to add?
Yes, of course. When it comes to consumer and enabling consumer access, what we look to is the unification of data models across the different technology stacks or silos. And we participate in the One Data Model group, of which several of the speakers here, I believe, are certainly aware of it, if not participating in it directly. And what it seeks to do is to create a single unified library of terms that could be used to enable this sort of cross-platform interoperability. Now, consumers will have other interactions with energy systems, and for example, with financial interaction or perhaps even operational interaction. And there, we look at a standard or de facto standard that we've had a hand in putting together called Orange Button to define solar industry terms, about 5,000 of them, and that's been aggregated with terms that are defined by the U.S. generally accepted accounting principles for financial interaction. So that's an example of something that's sector specific to energy generation. But of course, there is an interplay with consumer applications there. So that's where the harmonization and consolidation of projects like Chip or One Data Model come into play.
Great. And Maz, anything else from your perspective?
I really like the idea of Chip, and that's definitely something we will look into more closely. But I think in general, if you want to enable consumers to take part in any kind of market with their devices, we really see that standards should focus on devices because they last a long time, and markets change often. So what we hope is that consumers will not have to be actively participating in these markets themselves, and their devices in aggregate will autonomously manage their consumers' needs. And so, it's really about simplifying, I think, the device standards and standardizing the cloud communications between manufacturers and aggregators.
Great. And so, Rehan, anything from the CTA side and your perspective when you've done some of the landscaping on behalf of the Smart Energy Advisory Group to add to those points?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's certainly a lot of standards work going on to address interoperability, both at the national and international level, also within several SDOs and alliances. However, whole home automation is still a very customized application. Depends on the consumer, depends on product manufacturers, depends on service providers, and home automation itself only goes so far in terms of savings. So in order to scale an individual dwelling or home savings, these devices need to be able to communicate to an energy aggregator or regionally to a smart community for additional savings potential. And because these are such customized solutions, individual APIs generally need to be created to bridge the communication protocols. And developers at each one of those levels may struggle with the implementation of these API methods. One potential path forward that's been discussed previously is to create a basic or standardized APIs at the device level or at the aggregation level and the eventual service providers. However, even with all of the individual industry standards were lacking implementation. There are numerous standards and protocols really for everyone to choose from, which is working against standardization, right? The more standards you have to choose from, the less standardized the whole process gets. And right now, I think everyone is maybe waiting for a push or a nudge in one direction or the other, and it really may come from any entity. For example, in the other vertical product categories, the white goods, the push comes from regulators or voluntary programs like Energy Star, or sometimes industry-led voluntary agreements that CTA has implemented in the past. In this particular space, it may take a device maker who has a large share of the marketplace to go in one direction, or it may come from a regulator, such as in case of California and Rule 21. So just kind of have to wait and see.
Great, thanks, Rehan. And speakers, keep in mind, I'm going to ask you your crystal ball question down the road here a little bit. So start thinking through that. But since we're here at the CTA Technology and Standards Forum, I want to hone in a little bit on a specific standard, CTA 2045, Modular Communications Interface for Energy Management. I know a few of our speakers touched on that standard earlier, and we've also received some comments and questions from our audience members. So Rehan, maybe I can start with you, and then Naz, cue you up to jump in after. To kind of see what are some of your thoughts or things you're hearing from industry about the role of CTA 45 for managing devices and potentially adding extensions to it to enable more smart energy services.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give you a little more background on the standard itself was a collaboration between CTA members, EPRI, USNAP Alliance, and others. The standard essentially enables demand response capabilities for products. It's been most implemented in water heaters and is required by some state legislations in the Pacific Northwest as a standard to implement demand response capabilities. The standard also has dot extensions, one which Gary mentioned, covering energy management systems, others thermostat, and there are several other dot extensions as well. This standard itself does have the flexibility to adapt to other devices, other systems. And it's worth noting that additional extensions have come after field testing and field implementation of those particular products. And each dot extension standard is then updated based on any potential issues that manufacturers see in the field. So the standards in this case have come after practical implementation of these products. And the benefit of 2045 is that it is an ANSI national standard. Compared to international standards, it can be revised very quickly to address updated communication protocols. And not to downplay the need for international standards, there is a huge harmonization value for international standards, but the progress is often slow. It may not capture newer items as technology in the space evolves very quickly. At the national level, SDOs like CTA may be able to fill in that role to develop something quickly, such as extensions to 2045 and further improve implementation.
Great, thanks, Rehan. And Maz, anything you'd like to add? I know you talked a lot about 2045 in your presentation. From your perspective?
So I think I would take advice from Bill Clinton. So keep it simple standard. And the way we see it's really, I think CTA has been around a long time, and with water heaters, it works pretty well. With heat pumps, anything that's temperature related, it seems to work pretty well. But the extensions have really been hard to work with because they're not the same. And so you end up having basically to customize your approach to handling an EV under CTA, electric vehicle charger under CTA, and a water heater under CTA. And so they're not really standards if you have to customize too much. So I think that's the one piece that's definitely a challenge. And so if we just focus on just devices and let the market potential of the utilities, the use cases be outside of the standard, I think that would simplify it a lot. So, if you gave us on-off capability, power measurement, which is a challenge, I know, and a comfort a component to the hardware level data, I think that would be a great place to go.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'll have to, as somebody who works in our technology and standards department here at CTA, have to say, for you and all of our folks participating, this is all really great feedback down to the usability of our standards. So we hope folks that after this dialogue and discussion will engage with us and find ways to, help us to improve and enhance the standards in this space. So I want to shift a little bit away from the communication standard and actually think a little bit about, the different solutions that are out there. And Chris, maybe I can ask you a little bit about whether the CHIP project would actually only be applicable to the connected home, or how would it integrate more broadly in the home?
Sure, that's a good question. There's a few different ways that in the home, CHIP can help, more broadly connect devices, and that's through, as I talked about earlier, bridging between different systems that today use other protocols, and so, so CHIP defines a data model for a lot of the different common device types. It's based on the Zigbee cluster library, but it's got additions coming in from Alexis Smart Home and from Weave and from HomeKit and other other participants in order to model as many different kinds of devices as we can, in a single way. And so when CHIP is used to talk to let's say a hub that manages a Z-Wave network, that hub is able to expose the Z-Wave devices as CHIP devices on the IP network. And in that way, it's really able to bring together lots of different devices from lots of different protocols and allow applications to take into account all of those and see them all, as one kind of device: light bulbs, door locks, energy meters, whatever they happen to be. And so CHIP, so in that way, CHIP does bridge together these systems. But in terms of whether it's just for smart home, we do see and expect that it will be used beyond just the home. We do have some teams within the Zigbee Alliance already focused on looking at commercial applications of CHIP as well. And so our focus to begin with has been the home, but we do expect it to be used much more broadly, much in the same way that you see Z-Wave and Zigbee being used in commercial applications as well.
Great, thanks so much, Chris. So I have another question that just came in, and for all of our panelists here. So do you think that changes to the electrical utility rate structures might help to increase consumer adoption of smart energy solutions? Our questioner says more specifically, might consumers adopt these technologies even faster if they receive a reward for saving energy that is more like a credit card reward, something that's tangible or perhaps easier to appreciate than just a lower bill? So Tom, maybe do you want to start with some thoughts on that?
Well, sure. Yeah, utility rate structures. Boy, what a complicated topic that is. Rate structures and tariffs and so forth. And generally speaking, of all of the rate structures have their strengths and weaknesses and impose a certain amount of friction in the system overall. So are there things that utilities and society can do to incent behaviors? No question. In the round is the idea that's being proposed worthy of a further discussion as part of that. Again, no question. But there's a thousand, I think, interesting and good ideas out there. The question is, what's the right strategy to actually get them implemented through the wheels of government and so forth. But there's no question that in the era of the prosumer, where people are consuming and generating and really participating full on in the energy economy, that there's just no question that there are good ways to incent those behaviors, and that utility rate structures will play an important part.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Chris, any thoughts from you on that topic?
So I definitely agree that that incentive structures can help consumers, to take advantage of some of the different smart energy features. I mean, I think it's got to be a combination of incentives and also promotion. Making sure that some of these systems are, consumers realize that they have access to them or that they can use them, and so I think promotion has definitely got to be an important point of that, because some of these systems, incentives exist today and people just don't even realize it. So I think it's got to be perhaps a multi-pronged approach to make sure consumers are aware of what the options are and then incentivized as well.
Great, and maybe I'll add kind of another element to that, and then open it up to our panelists for some more thoughts. Thinking kind of beyond the traditional grid, what opportunities for network device manufacturers related to solar and other types of alternative energy storages might exist in this space? So any one of our panelists want to jump in with some thoughts on that?
Sure, I guess I'll start. This is Tom with Sunspec. This is something I do all day, every day, is work on these this class of problem, or opportunity, I should say. And I think that the opportunities there are immense. You consider the energy system generally has remained unchanged from an IT perspective for probably the previous 30 to 40 years. And so what's happening now with distributed energy, solar storage, electric vehicles is really nothing short of a revolution, both from electric economy standpoint, but also from an information and operational technology standpoint. So we encourage manufacturers of all types to reach out to Sunspec. We can put you into direct contact with opportunities for things like gateway devices, for security devices, for bridging technologies that enable the home area networks to better connect with the operational networks associated with the utilities, all manner of classes of both use cases and I think corresponding economic opportunities in that space.
Great, thanks, Tom. Maz, anything on your end to add on this topic?
I think kind of going back to the incentives, we saw the solar panels, the adoption has been pretty significant when the tax incentive was very large and has slowed down quite significantly. You saw in very large purchases. So if you go back to your earlier question about, how do we get people excited about connected devices through utility rates? And I think, Tom, you're right, utility rates is extremely complicated. But I also think the utility rates are potentially the wrong solution. In California, we're seeing lots of negative prices. Utilities will never offer negative prices on a time of use rate, for example. And when you have lots of smart devices, that we have to be careful that these devices are not actually harming by basically self-optimizing around these time of use rates. So there are lots of cases in California where Nest's thermostats, if they were to self-optimize around the time of use rate, would have massive power spikes right before the price transitions from on-peak to off-peak and off-peak to on-peak. And so to manage these massive spikes, you really need some kind of aggregation. You need some way to basically control the spikes. And so that's not a price problem, that's a control problem. And so I think we want to be careful that when we design these rates and we expose people to prices that A, the incentives are big enough so that people don't become poor because of it, and B, that the incentives are getting us in the right direction and not be too static.
Great, thanks. Chris, Rayhan, any other thoughts from your end on this topic?
None for me.
Okay. Well, great. So let me shift a little bit to another topic, and I do want to encourage our attendees, feel free to keep sending in your questions to the chat box, and I'll pass them along to our panelists. In the response, and it's come up both in the presentations and in a few other things. We talked a little bit about data security. And so, Rehan, maybe I'll cue this one up for you first and then go to our other panelists. But wanted to get some thoughts on how can we ensure data within systems can be trusted and the devices are not compromised. I know that CTA has some work underway in this space on cybersecurity. Anything you can share with our audience?
Yes, thanks, Carrie, for the question. Security itself is very important, not only to the consumers, but providers who like to know they can trust the information within the system itself. CTA has been very active in the cybersecurity space, as you mentioned, and is in the process of developing a baseline cybersecurity standard for devices and device systems. The standard itself will specify baseline security requirements, recommendations for devices and device systems to address the destructive potential of botnets and other potential security threats. Beyond the individual device, the standard will have elements of security for device systems, which include the connected endpoint device and broader connected elements of the product, such as apps and cloud services. Similar to CTA 2045 with its extensions when needed. For this particular standard, if needed, extensions can be created to specifically address smart energy management systems themselves.
Great, thanks. So Chris, how about within the chip system? Is security of data something that's being considered?
So security and privacy are actually two of the the top priorities for connected home over IP. I think it's a particular challenge that you have with IoT devices just because of the small profile of those devices and the length of time that they end up being in people's homes, that you've got to set the bar high from the beginning, and you've got to ensure that best practices are followed around security. And so this is one of the reasons why with Project Chip, it was important to us to bring together the leaders in the industry, companies that have been pushing the envelope on security and privacy, as well as, and that comes from, not just, from a stance perspective on privacy of user data, but also, making sure that the security algorithms that we're using are the best in the industry right now, and ensuring that we have functionality like OTA so that you can not just have your devices be secure today, but also be secure tomorrow. These are important components of it. And, I think in order for consumers to embrace, connected home and smart homes and smart energy, they have to have peace of mind that the devices that they're putting into their houses are going to protect their privacy, and that they're going to be the ones in charge of what happens with that data. And so that is a key tenet of Project Connected Home over IP. And I think it's especially relevant here because oftentimes the applications and the features that you want, they require data from the different devices in the home. And so we want to make sure that when that happens, it's with a user permission, that it's anonymized, different things like that, in order to make sure that we're providing, we're meeting the expectations of the consumer.
Thanks, Chris. Tom, any thoughts from you on this?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to add that first of all, I applaud the efforts that are taking place, as were mentioned by the other members here of the panel. For our part, Sunspec works with Sandia National Labs. We run the Sunspec Sandia Cybersecurity Working Group, specifically to handle this topic of what happens when the consumer interacts with the rest of the society, government, regulated utilities, et cetera. And so both security and privacy are definitely paramount there. So in part, the concern about security over the wire is addressed by the core standards that are implemented, IEEE 2030.5 in the case of California, which includes basically two-way exchange of digital certificates between the device in the home or the residence and ultimately the utility server. So that's one basic and practical method is put into place. And of course, those security algorithms, the encryption methods are reviewed all the time. And as and when the standard needs to evolve to react to some new cybersecurity threat, it's prepared to do so. But there's a lot of work to be done here. And the energy economy has now moved online. And so this, I think, it will be ultimately sort of a fundamental differentiator, I think, for the competitors out here ultimately, I guess, it's the consumer experience, but I'm saying that the consumer experience will be measured by how safe and how protected they feel in this, because it's an essential service that people are interacting with all the time. And so, again, please, if you're not already involved, join in on this very important effort to make these products even better for consumers.
Great, thanks so much. So I have another question here related to, for all of our panelists, kind of a little bit of a shift to a bigger view. So when you look down in the distant future, do you think we'll ever return to the situation of centuries ago where consumers generate all of the energy they need on site and there's no more grids? That's a big crystal ball question. Do any of our panelists want to jump in with some thoughts on that?
Sure. I think in the not too distant future, consumers will make all the energy or capture all the energy that they need right on site. Will that do away with the need for an electrical grid? I don't think so. The electrical grid offers too many other important personal and societal benefits for that concept to go away. But in terms of can we harvest enough sun and wind to power our every desire, I think that's inevitable. Yes.
I would agree with that as well. When it comes to the future of the grid, I think there are lots of utilities that have to ask very hard questions about their role in the future grid. And as Tom mentioned, I think if people become prosumers, it's not really going to be a question of whether they have enough energy. It's going to be whether or not they're able to share that energy with others. And to be able to share energy requires meshed communication networks, meshed power system networks. Most of the networks around us in our neighborhoods are not meshed, and that opens up a whole new question around the role of utilities, the role of grid architectures, and there are lots of other important questions we have to ask around what the future grid looks like. That's a very big question. It's a very exciting question, but it's a very big question to answer.
Great. Chris or Rayhan, any other thoughts on that?
I can speak for a minute. I agree with the other panelists that you're always going to want to have a distribution system because not everyone necessarily has the energy they need at the moment that they do. However, I think moving forward, you will see a definite trend toward companies and individuals generating their own energy. I mean, you may have seen some of the climate pledges from Amazon and other leading companies, about their intentions of getting to an energy neutral or carbon neutral stance for themselves. And in it, you'll see the same thing with homeowners where, they, as they do today, have solar panels on their homes or, and batteries to be able to store energy. But I still think a distribution network is going to be important because, there'll be gaps and there'll be times when you want to make sure that energy can flow between, those who have stored it and those who need it at that particular moment.
All right, so we're winding down on our time here. There was lots of things that we shared, and I wanted to kind of ask each of our panelists before we wrap here. Again, I mentioned up front, thinking into your crystal ball a little bit. I want each of you to kind of identify what you think might be the one barrier, and I know there are quite a few we've talked through, that we need to overcome in order to really see broad consumer adoption of smart energy technology. And so maybe I'll put Rehan on the spot first, because I know I had queued this question up with him earlier while we let our other speakers think through that one thing you would bring up.
Thanks, Carrie. So I'm going to base mine off of data. CTA's done a lot of consumer research in this area, looking at consumers' perspectives, home builders as well, and looking at smart cities and implementation. Really, what CTA's data is showing that the cost of devices and lack of familiarity and information remain some of the biggest barriers for consumers themselves. Because of this, consumers are most likely purchasing devices one at a time and not really taking that systems approach. Purchasing devices individually creates potential interoperability problems today as consumers purchase more, aggregate additional products, and makes the devices a little bit more difficult to use. So I think better understanding, more familiarity with the devices, and maybe a better understanding or consumer education in promoting savings potential that these devices offer when you take that systems approach.
Great, thanks, Rehan. Moz, do you want to jump in next?
Thank you for the excellent question. What is the one thing we need? So I think incentives are key. And to get those incentives in the hands of consumers, you have to overcome the 2-pint problem, which says that if people really work hard on optimizing their devices, they'll save something like $15 a month. That is not a lot of money. So energy is just inherently cheap, and it's getting cheaper. So I think the incentives are key, and the incentives of the future will drive towards kilowatt flexibility or megawatt flexibility, so power flexibility rather than energy value. And so it becomes, these to reach incentives that are meaningful for consumers to change their behaviors or to adopt connected devices. I really think that we need the right incentives to be in play. I think incentives are key.
Great. Chris, how about you?
So, I really feel that it's interoperability and standards that's what will create the ability for innovation to be what gets us, to a smarter energy management world where consumers are embracing the technologies. By having more interoperability among the different systems that that people have today, that will allow companies and individuals to put their creative minds to building innovative services and products for the end consumer that that help delight them with value. And the value may be in the form of cost savings, or it may be in the value of knowing that you're saving the environment, or other use cases that we can't even imagine yet. And so to us, at Amazon, what we feel will enable that or increase the likelihood of it is by having more interoperability through these standards like CHIP, so that you can build applications and services that that leverage all the different touch points in the consumer's home in ways that we can't envision right now.
Great. And Tom, any thoughts here to round it out?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say in terms of what's not on my list, in terms of barriers, economics is not a barrier. The renewable energy is abundant and cheap. Technology barriers are very rapidly coming down. So I think we just need to continue there, and we'll have no problem on that front. It may seem to be a bit orthogonal, but I would say that what needs to happen, one breakthrough needs to occur, is we need to complete this electrification of our transportation system. And why do I say that? that will create huge demands for the exchange of both information and the exchange of energy because of the accommodating infrastructure that goes along with that, both in the home and out in public. So that would be my answer. Let's complete the electrification of transportation as a method for reducing barriers to entry for consumer electronics that deal with this energy economy.
Well, thanks so much. And thank you again to all of our speakers for being here today and for participating in this dialogue. We started having conversations around this initiative of smart energy to identify ways that CTA could be impactful and help grow this space. And I think even just in our dialogue and our presentations, we've had a lot of different ideas about ways that we can modify, improve, and expand our standardization. So I would echo with a call of participation, all of our speakers, all of our attendees here today. We hope that you continue to engage in this dialogue with us, participate in our standards development program, and find ways to continue and improve the process. So with that, I hope to thank everybody for joining today and for your time. I hope that you'll join us for additional meetings and panel discussions as a part of our Technology and Standards Virtual Forum, which runs through tomorrow. You can find the full schedule at cta.tech/TS-Spring-Forum. And for those of you that are joining meetings that are starting at 3 o'clock, you'll find direct links to those right on the right-hand side of your screen. Thanks so much. Bye.